Well, hey there, and welcome to, I don't know what this is, if it's a bonus sermon, if it's a sermonette, if it's a continuation of Sunday, but this Sunday, in our Rebuild series, as we're going through Ezra, we actually jumped out of Ezra and spent some time in Haggai 1. And next week, we're headed to Ezra chapter 6. And what that means is that we didn't cover chapter 5. And although that's not totally something that's a problem, we do want to just take some time and say, hey, if you would like to come along with us and do that, we spent some time to try to put something together. Now, this is a little bit more of an unpolished sermon, if that's what you want to call it. Usually we have some prep and then we have a week to go. In fact, we just finished about 25 minutes ago prepping the sermon for this Sunday. And of course, we just did one 2 days ago. And so this one's kind of shoved in the middle. So it might be a little less refined than you're normally used to, but we hope that just by bringing a little bit of extra content and then also making sure we don't skip a part of the story, this is helpful to you. If you are listening on the audio podcast on Apple, Spotify, or on SoundCloud, that's great. There is going to be a YouTube version of this as well, because I do have my slide deck beside me. So if you wanted to watch it on YouTube and see the video along with, then you can do that too. With that, let's get started. So here's where we left ourselves on Sunday. The Israelites got going after Haggai's message. So Haggai comes in and says, hey, you're all in your own houses. You've rebuilt your own houses. They look great. Nice job. But the temple is still in ruin. And it's now 20 years later. And God, through Haggai, calls the people back to rebuild the temple. And as we saw on Sunday, it takes about 3 weeks for them to go, hey, this is really something we should get going. And so then they start in on it. So after they start rebuilding the temple, some people come around and ask, hey, what's going on? And this is because there's been a bunch of changes in leadership and the bureaucracy and the communication in and around Persia. You'll remember that they're in Judah. It was conquered by Babylon, and then Babylon was conquered by Persia, and now Persia has had multiple leadership changes. So we started in Ezra with Cyrus the Great, okay? And he's the one that sent that first wave of exiles back to rebuild the temple in the first place. And then, of course, they ran into some opposition from the locals, which is one of the big reasons they stopped the rebuilding process in the first place. After Cyrus, we've got a couple of other leaders before we get to Darius, who's the leader that is the key governmental leader in this story. So Cyrus reigns for quite a while, and then Cambyses, is that right, James? How do I say it? Cambyses. It's one I've been getting it wrong the whole time. James is in the booth, so he's going to catch me on this stuff. Cambyses reigns from 530 to 522. Cambyses is Cyrus's brother or son. He's his son. Sorry, this is what a non-refined sermon looks like. I'm going to look at my notes a little bit more. Then this guy, Bardia, he claims to be a brother of Cyrus, but he's not. And so he only lasts a few months before Darius comes in, overthrows him. He's a usurper, so they overthrow him with a bunch of nobles. And now you've got Darius I, or Darius the Great, who's in charge. And Darius is all about order. Darius wants to take this empire and put it back in order. And that means a lot of things. It means making sure he knows what's going on. It means making sure he puts people in governmental positions to make sure that they can report back. Again, it's an expansion of the bureaucracy, but Darius also, as we're going to see coming up this week, wants to make sure he's currying favor, not just with the people, but with all the gods in the area and in the Persian Empire. So Darius is all about order, and what we're about to see is how that order begins to work itself through. So here's how Ezra chapter 5 starts. Now Haggai, and this is what we read this week, Haggai the prophet And Zechariah the prophet, a descendant of Edo, prophesied to the Jews in Judah and Jerusalem in the name of God of Israel, who was over them. Then Zerubbabel, and I've got this highlighted because he's also, remember, he's a governmental official. Joshua is the leader spiritually, but Zerubbabel is the governor of Judah, so he has a governmental position, and that's going to come into play in a minute. Zerubbabel, son of Shealtiel, and Joshua, son of Jozadak, set to work to rebuild the house of God in Jerusalem, and the prophets of God were with them, supporting them. So Haggai comes in, says, hey, you guys need to start rebuilding, and then they do. Now here's what happens next. At that time, Tantanai, governor of Trans-Euphrates, and Shithar-Bozenai and their associates went to them, the Israelites, and asked, who authorized you to rebuild this temple and to finish it? Now, we need to remember here that Darius has taken over. We're trying to regain a little bit of structure in the empire, and we want to know the things that are going on. Also, this temple stopped getting rebuilt about 20 years ago. And so now, all of a sudden, it's being rebuilt kind of out of nowhere. And so this governmental official, Tantanai, he comes in and goes, hey, who said that this was allowed? And this is interesting. And again, if you're on the visual, if you're on YouTube here, I'm going to throw a map up and maybe we'll edit this map into the screen. But you have to think of it like we have levels of government. You have like a ward counselor and they look after a certain area. And then you have a mayor. And then you have, your premier. And then we have the federal government that works itself in. So if you think about Zerubbabel, he was the governor of Judah. Okay, but Tantanai, he's the person who's overlooking the governors of Judah and some areas in Babylon and Cyprus. This is the Trans-Euphrates area. So when Tantanai comes in and says, who's authorizing this? He's a level above, from a government structure standpoint, than Zerubbabel. So Zerubbabel would have to answer to him. And what we've got is a governmental official going, hey, I've noticed you've started rebuilding this whole thing after it hasn't been being built for a very long time. Who said that this was okay? They also asked, this is Tantanai and his officials, they also asked, what are the names of those who are constructing this building? Okay, so he's basically saying, who allowed you to do this? And then he's saying, I'd like to report back as to who you are. Because what I'm going to do is I'm going to send something to King Darius to let him know what's going on. And so what we're going to do is we're going to gather the information, just like anybody normally would. But the eye of their God was watching over them and the elders of the Jews, and they were not stopped until a report could go to Darius and his written reply be received. So here's what this is basically saying. They're saying God was looking over them. God calls them back to start rebuilding. These government officials come in and they say, hey, who let you do this? And they're going to tell them, okay? But they also don't have to stop rebuilding until they get a letter back from Darius. This is a copy of the letter that Tantanai, governor of Trans-Euphrates, and Shethar-Bozenai and their associates, the officials of Trans-Euphrates, sent to the king. So you've got Tantanai, and he's overlooking Trans-Euphrates, and he's sending a report about Judah to Darius. Okay, I'm going to say that one more time. You've got Tantanai, he's almost like middle management at this point. He's sending a report that he gets about Judah, which is being ruled by Zerubbabel, or governed by Zerubbabel. He gathers the information, he writes this letter, and then he sends it to the king. He's just doing his job. The report they sent him read as follows. So here's what the report says. Tantanai writes to King Darius, cordial greetings. The king should know that we went to the district of Judah, to the temple of the great God. They would know who this is. They know who the Israelites are. They know about Judah. They know about this temple. And really, he's just saying, hey, look, I went over here. I'm doing my job. I'm reporting it back to you. The people are building it with large stones and placing the timbers in the walls. The work is being carried on with diligence and is making rapid progress under their direction. Now, this is a much different tone than some of the more oppositional tones that we've heard before. This is a report back to the king. We were doing our jobs. We questioned the elders and we said to them, "Who authorized you to rebuild this temple and to finish it?" We also asked them their names so that we could write down the names of their leaders for your information. So we've got the district of Judah. They're rebuilding this thing. It's ruled by Zerubbabel. We want to make sure you know what's going on. So we asked them what they were doing. We asked them who they were. And here's what they told us that we could report back to you. This is the answer they gave us. So now this is the Israelites that gave the answer to Tantanai, which is now making its way to Darius. "We are the servants of the God of heaven and earth, and we are rebuilding the temple that was built many years ago, one that a great king of Israel built and finished. That was Solomon. But because our ancestors angered the God of heaven, and we read this a few weeks ago, he gave them into the hands of Nebuchadnezzar the Chaldean, king of Babylon, who destroyed this temple and deported the people to Babylon." This is how this whole story started and where we picked it up. "However, in the first year of Cyrus, king of Babylon, King Cyrus issued a decree to rebuild this house." So now this is the Israelites looking at this guy who's coming in and saying, "Hey, what's going on?" And he's going to go, "We're going to remind you of what happened. So we were sent here by Cyrus to do this work. The work stopped for a while, but when you say, 'Who authorized us to build this?' our answer is, a decree came from Cyrus a whole bunch of years ago that we were able to do this. He, Cyrus, even removed from the temple of Babylon the gold and silver articles of the house of God, which Nebuchadnezzar had taken from the temple in Jerusalem and brought to the temple in Babylon." I love this because they go, Cyrus said we could do this, and he even took it a step further, and he took the things that were taken from us and he gave them back. Then King Cyrus gave them to a man named Sheshbazzar, whom he had appointed governor, and he told him, "Take these articles and go and deposit them in the temple in Jerusalem." And we read about that happening before. "And rebuild the house of God on its site." So this Sheshbazzar came and he laid the foundation of the house of God in Jerusalem. From that day to the present, it has been under construction, but is not yet finished. I love this. So who authorized you to do this? Cyrus did. I noticed that you've restarted to rebuild this thing. Like we have, but from the day of Cyrus, we've been allowed to rebuild it, and we're still working on it now. We're just not finished yet. It's a really interesting way to talk about what's happening now. Now, if it pleases the king, and this is the, "Hey, we've told you what's going on. Now you go test it out and see if you can find a record of this. Now, if it pleases the king, let a search be made in the royal archives of Babylon to see if King Cyrus did in fact issue a decree to rebuild this house of God in Jerusalem." This is the second time we've now seen a group of people advocate to a king and say, "Hey, go check our work. Don't just take our word for it. Go check it out. Then let the king send us his decision in this matter." Now, something that we've discussed in our prep a couple times and things that we've talked about and something that James has reminded us a couple of times of as we're talking is that Darius, in a certain way, kind of really wanted to be like the next Cyrus. Like Cyrus was this great, incredible leader. He's known for amazing things, both in the way he governed, in the way he ruled, in the way he kept calm and control. And now there's been a little bit of disruption over the last few years. You had his son take over, and then you had somebody else who took over that wasn't supposed to. And there's been a lot of disruption from an organizational leadership governmental standpoint. But when Darius comes in, he wants to reestablish all that. And he wants to look at what Cyrus did as a model, and then he wants to build upon that. And so advocating to Darius and saying, look at what Cyrus did, but you can make your own call, is a great strategy, because Darius wants to not only do what Cyrus did, but as we're going to see a little bit later, he kind of wants to do it even better. So this is the end of the letter, okay? This is what we ended with now. And on Sunday, what we do is we jump into the reply that Darius sends. So we wanted to just make sure we took a few minutes, read this over, and gave a little bit of context, because if you come in next week having not read this part or missed this sermon, you'll almost be like, you're going to feel like you really missed a part of the story. And this is an important chunk of the story. But we really felt like the sermon, the lesson this week, was actually in what Haggai said, as opposed to picking apart this letter specifically. Here's what we'll end on. God calls his people to rebuild, and the people respond, right? Haggai calls the people and says, hey, God has said you should do this. You need to restart. And then when the government comes and goes, hey, we've noticed that you're building the temple again, they go, well, yes, we were told that we were allowed to rebuild it, and construction has technically happened the whole time, even though they kind of know they took about 20 years off. But now they've rebuilt, and they've got a king in Persia who they're advocating to and saying, let us know whether or not we're allowed to continue to do this. And without giving too much away, we're going to come into next week and we're going to see that Darius not only affirms what Cyrus said in the first place, but as Darius tries to do multiple times, he goes above and beyond and gives them even more than they were asking for in the first place. So just a quick little midweek peek into Ezra chapter 5 to make sure that we're not jumping over important parts of the story before we get to the next piece. I hope this was helpful, and we're really looking forward to continuing into Ezra chapter 6 on Sunday when we find out what Darius's reply was and how to make sure that we slow down and carefully read it. If you want to read ahead, I would suggest you go ahead and read Ezra chapter 6 and you start to try to compare what Darius is saying and how he's saying it, and consider his motivation and consider what Cyrus said before, because that's where we're headed this week. So if you want to do a little bit of work, you can do that. You can also check out the workbook. It's got some interesting reflection questions in it as well. And we'll see you on Sunday. There is an N in there. Tatanai. Tatanai. James keeps telling me I'm putting an extra N in it and calling him Tantanai, which is probably true. So, same guy, different pronunciation. Sorry. Tatanai. Tatanai.